Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be with this committee today. I am the Vice Chair of the Public Safety National Security Committee, and I applaud my colleagues for bringing forward this comprehensive 1064 motion on this critical issue that I think...
Sorry, Chair. Point of order. I've been made aware that, a committee member is having tech issues logging on, so if we could give him some time to log on.
That would be...
Yeah.
I'll just verify with the clerk. Good grace, no. Mr. Clerk, one moment, Mr. Dancho, we'll come back to you. So I hear the IT will look into it and is working with Mr. Massé to make sure that he can join the meeting. So I think we can pursue. I'm hoping Mr. Massé can hear, but Madame Dancho, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As I was saying, I'm the Vice Chair of the Public Safety National Security Committee, and it's a real pleasure to be with industry today, and I appreciate and applaud my colleagues for bringing forward this very comprehensive motion to investigate a very critical issue that I think many Canadians are paying attention to. The Prime Minister, of course, has weighed in on this, as has the Minister of Public Safety. I would like to hear more from Minister Champagne, given he is the industry minister lead, of course, and this, I think it does impact a number of different areas of government, national security, of course, industry. We also can look at the impact it has on setting a precedent should we allow these types of contracts to continue. Now, the government has said that it is pausing this contract, but I do have concern that given the company that received the contract that is ultimately owned in part by a company, Hytera, as mentioned by my colleague, which is based in the People's Republic of China. We know that some of that technology in this contract is already being implemented in Ontario and Saskatchewan. And I have not heard from Minister Champagne or the Prime Minister or the Minister of Public Safety whether this pause of the contract will mean that that technology that's already in place, again, for surveillance purposes for RCMP, quite shocking when you consider that the parent companies are in part are owned by the People's Republic of China, is now sort of responsible now for the surveillance technology of RCMP. I have not heard from this government of whether they will be insisting the removal of that technology. You would have thought that, or I would have thought that would have been one of the first things they would have committed to, that if there is any threat to our national security and setting a precedent in this surveillance industry that we have in Canada, whether it's for national security or within our telecoms utilized by, for example, the Department of National Defense, you would think that they would set a clear standard that this is unacceptable and it will be removed immediately. But we did see with the Liberal government, they took about 5 years to commit to removing the Huawei technology. And because it took so long, it'll cost hundreds of millions of additional dollars that will be passed down to the consumer. Huawei and the 5G technology we saw has so infiltrated our telecommunications systems that it will be very hard work to remove that. So I have those same concerns with what's happening here. And we know, and was mentioned by my colleague, that there, from the U.S. Department of Justice earlier this year, I believe in February 2022, there was a federal indictment unsealed that showed that there were 21 counts of 21 counts of charges of conspiracy to commit theft of trade secrets of Hytera. So we see that in the United States, they're being very aggressive and transparent with the threat that Hytera, which again is sort of the parent of the parent company that owns Sinclair. So we see the Americans taking very strong action on this, and yet we have not seen the Prime Minister or the Minister of Industry or the Minister of Public Safety make a very clear statement that this surveillance technology that is being provided by this ultimately Chinese-owned company, so to speak, will be removed in Ontario and Saskatchewan. So I'd like to hear that, and I'd like the Minister of Public Safety and the Minister of Industry to come to this committee and make that commitment. Further to that, Mr. Chair, I am concerned that there may be other contracts like this, and that has not been made clear. This was found because of very solid journalism in this country. That's great, but are there more? You would think if there's one, there's likely others. And we know recently the Minister of Foreign Affairs brought forward her Indo-Pacific strategy, and that falls under the Canada-China Committee that I also sit on. And there was certainly appreciation for the tougher stance that was communicated in that Indo-Pacific strategy, Mr. Chair. But what I would say is that the government on one side is saying, well, procurement is independent. They're blaming the procurement or the independence system of procurement in this with this government, saying, well, it's independent. We don't agree with it, but it is independent. So they're sort of blaming others for what's happened under their watch. But what I would say is that every independent agency of government certainly has to follow the ethos, the values set forward by the Prime Minister and his cabinet. So I would argue that perhaps if the Indo-Pacific strategy that Conservatives have been calling on for quite some time was brought forward sooner, perhaps the procurement agency would have had a better idea of the threat analysis of China and companies that are partly Chinese-owned that provide surveillance, technology and other technologies. Perhaps they would have had that lens to apply to this contract. So I don't believe that it is an appropriate assessment of the Prime Minister to sort of kick this over to the independent procurement agency and say it's all on them. But I would have said if they would have brought forward the Indo-Pacific strategy that makes it quite a bit more clear the threat analysis of China, perhaps the independent procurement agency would have had a more clear picture to really enter any kind of contracts with companies like this with eyes wide open. So I know that there is some discussion of, does this fall under public safety? Does this fall under foreign affairs? Does this fall under China committee? Does it fall under industry? Certainly, given the Minister Champagne is bringing forward bills like Bill C-27, which is in part related to Minister of Public Safety's Bill C-26, that ultimately is a bill, Bill C-26, to deal with the telecommunications in this country and other companies that are providing national security, critical infrastructure type of services. So I would say that while both committees and both ministers play a role, given Bill C-26 and Bill C-27, which is the industry committee, are closely related in some ways, I think it would make sense, given what I know about industry committee, and not out of scope to have the ministers come forward to this committee. And I hope that members consider that, given that this may be an industry-wide problem, even just beyond the telecommunications and surveillance. This could be in data management. We can see health services and the privacy information therein. There are countless industries across Canada that may very well have contracts owned in part or in full that are connected to the People's Republic of China. And so this is a national security concern. And my point being is that it also impacts a number of industries. And that's why we're seeing similar bills under Minister Mendicino and Minister Champagne. And so I do feel that it would seem it is appropriate to set the standard for industry at the industry committee, that these types of contracts will not be tolerated any longer, and certainly bringing attention to the Minister of Procurement and other ministers impacted by this, that given the very clear message, or I would say clearer perhaps message set forth in the Pacific strategy, that there needs to be a whole of government approach to reviewing all contracts provided. But again, the last thing I'll mention is that it is not just government contracts that are of concern. There are other private contracts that are of concern in multiple different industries, or there may be. But it's likely if there's one that got through the procurement vetting process with the Government of Canada, it is very likely there are a number of private entities that have contracts that would impact our national security and that really go across a number of industries. So I appreciate the very comprehensive 1064 motion put forward. I think it certainly is exhaustive, and I think that that's important because we want to make sure we don't have any cracks in this. It is very critical that we ensure that the veil is lifted on this, so to speak, and that the industry committee make a very clear message by passing this 1064 to all industries who may have contracts with the People's Republic of China that may impact data security, surveillance, and the like, to take note. And so the industry committee taking a leadership role in that, I think, sends a very, very strong message across industries that are critical to our national security. So I hope that the committee consider that. I hope they consider taking that leadership position, Mr. Chair, and certainly lead by example at this committee and set a very clear tone that any industry impacted by national security concerns be made aware. So those would be my remarks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Mr. Erskine Smith.
Thanks, Joel.